In the last few decades, few cases have captured public attention as much as the unsolved murders of Libby German and Abigail Williams. But the story of these two girls, with their whole lives ahead of them, has not always been simply a tragic one. Instead, it has been one of anger, one where long stretches of silence stretches with frustration, one way where every day without a resolution has felt like a further injustice to their names, and one where the community and the police have always held a tenuous relationship. The response from authorities throughout these years will soon find their reckoning in the same courtroom as their prime suspect. The police's interactions with the public have often been veiled in ambiguities, leading to many believing that the case had been botched from the get-go. Today, as a trial finally nears, we want to look back on this case, briefly going through all the important details and seeing just why the road here has been so discouraging and why people are starting to find hope again. In the quiet town of Delphi, Indiana, there is a place that somehow feels more excluded than most. The town's little open secret, now turned into a haunting reminder of what happened one chilly February afternoon. This spot is the Monon High Bridge, or simply the High Bridge. Standing before it, you'll see it showing its age, brown from rust on its sides, and its tracks missing in some spots on the top. Standing on it, there are no railings to stop you from peering over the side. You could look straight down more than 60 feet at the flowing waters of Deer Creek, which flows murky and steady into the Wabash River. Many, even before the events of 2017, would describe the spot as ominous. The structure is unstable in some parts, rusted all over, and in the colder months of the year, the lush green forest turns into gray brush for as far as the eye can see. However, that's not how many locals saw it. Built in 1891 and abandoned in 1987, the High Bridge enjoyed a new purpose. It was popular for wedding photos and as an off-kilter walking path. Hikers didn't go out of their way to avoid it, but to cross it. In some ways, it was the destination. Many people knew it for what it was, a small-town icon that felt like a literal bridge to the past. Two of these locals were Abigail "Abby" Williams and Libby German. Neither of them were strangers to the appeal the bridge had, nor were they inexperienced when it came to the surrounding trails. February 13th brought with it milder weather and a day off school, the perfect excuse for the two to visit the bridge again. That's why Libby asked her older sister, Kelsey German, to drop the girls off that day. Kelsey obliged with the agreement that the girls would be picked up later that day. The drop-off was around 1:30 p.m., and they arranged to meet back there not too long after. The girls, best friends, eagerly went off on the walk, ready to take pictures and to gaggle. But when the time came and passed and the afternoon sun started to fall, it was clear something was wrong. The German family reached out to the Williams. There was no sight or sound from the girls. They had failed to rendezvous back as agreed to, and with the cold night falling, there was a sense of urgency to find them. The local community quickly came together to help comb the area, with the initial search going deep into the evening. Still, there was no word from either of the girls, who were now officially considered missing. Early the next morning on the 14th, the search resumed. Sadly, any hopefulness started to break down when two unidentified bodies were found not far off the water. Police cleared the area and started sectioning it off, but did not say much else. The police eventually confirmed that foul play was involved, but it would only be the next day, on the 15th, where a public statement would confirm what the community already knew in their hearts. The bodies were two young girls. Abigail "Abby" Williams and Libby German had been murdered. Before continuing, we need to refresh on one of the most important details of the case, certainly the one that has captivated the public attention for so long. Between the worlds of the forest and the historic abandoned bridge, this case had a distinctly modern element to it, all held in Libby's iPhone. There is a reason the case is often referred to as the Snapchat Murders. While on the high bridge, around 45 minutes after being dropped off, Libby took 2 pictures and uploaded them to the social media app. One was of Abby walking across it, and the other was a front-facing shot of the bridge, almost looking like it stretched into infinity. These would be the last 2 things Libby was ever known to post, but it would not be the last thing she'd record. The investigation swung into full force, and on the 22nd of February, police released ominous footage that had been taken by Libby in a commendable act of quick thinking. In the short video, a man, heavily dressed, is seen walking and seems to be saying, "Down the hill." Police said they would not be releasing the rest of the video, but called on the public to help identify the mysterious stranger. It seemed a smoking gun. It's important to remember that Delphi has always been a small town, hovering under 3,000 residents. The release of this man's footage and voice could lead to an identification, but there were, of course, problems. Thousands of tips came through, but frustratingly, what would follow would not be any immediate arrests. Instead, a year turned into another, and then another. And as time passed, public frustration with the police grew. If you've been following the case for any time, you'll know that many hold it as an example of poor police-to-public relations at best and a total investigative faux pas at worst. First, there was the release of the video itself, which many have argued was too selective to be helpful. Between the poor audio quality and short runtime, it was difficult for people to identify anything about the man's voice or features. Law enforcement officials held strong that they were withholding the full video and audio to preserve the integrity of the investigation. Keep those words in mind, because this exact response is something they would constantly fall back on over and over again. Take, for example, the periods of prolonged silence from authorities, which have led many in the public feeling in the dark. Regular updates, even if minimal, can be crucial in high-profile cases like this one to maintain public trust and cooperation. And while sporadic and brief updates are one thing, a lack of consistency started to take hold. On July 17, 2017, police released a composite sketch, apparently informed by eyewitness accounts from other hikers near the trails. 2 years later, they would announce a new direction, and the newly released sketch was almost comically different from the first. With this announcement, they asked for help from the public in identifying an abandoned vehicle that was spotted on the day of the murders. These whirlwind changes led a lot to be desired, and many questions were raised. Why were the police only asking for help in identifying the vehicle years after the fact? And why were the 2 composite sketches night and day from one another? When pressed on the later issue, Superintendent Doug Carter commented, in characteristically unspecific terms, the following: "I think that was the absolute right decision at the time to do what they did. I've always said that the 2 sketches are simply sketches. They are not photographs. It's a piece of an investigative puzzle." Contrast this vagueness with the way in which Carter addressed the crowd at this same press conference when it came to finding the girl's murderer. "To the murderer, who may be in this room, we believe you are hiding in plain sight. In more than 2 years, you never thought we would shift gears to a different investigative strategy, but we have. We know this is about power to you. You want to know what we know, and one day, you will." This type of language is bold and direct, which places it in dissonance to the secretive and slow progress the case seemed to have behind the scenes. Where other press conferences were held, they seemed performative at best. Questions from how the girls were murdered, to whether any new suspects were being interviewed, to whether any new evidence had been found, would all be met with the same response. For the purposes of the investigation, the police were withholding important information. And it's no wonder why the community at large were becoming frustrated. Abby and Libby's case, their lives cut far too short, seemed to be becoming an investigative theater. The showmanship of confidence Carter had addressed the murderer felt totally out of line with each new calendar year, with no arrests. Libby German's mother, speaking with WYBC, admitted that she never really saw eye to eye with Doug Carter and his approach to the case, and her frustrations with the lack of progress were mounting with each passing year. By 2022, She had repeatedly sought the help of private investigators, but the police's refusal to give up any information barred them pursuing threads by themselves. But one was about to unravel. One of these threads surrounds a mysterious man who, as we know now, does not exist. Anthony Schatz, an online persona who might have been the mask the murderer was using to entrap young girls. The account, before it was deleted, seemed to operate primarily through Snapchat and Instagram. The individual behind it pretended to be a wealthy male model and showed off his love for all things lavish. Police confirmed that the man whose photos were being used was not a suspect. Investigators revealed in the later months of 2021 that they believed that the person behind the Catfish account had been in contact with Libby the day of the murders. They even had a name, Keegan Kline, who lived in Peru, Indiana, at the time the crime took place. This was major. Approaching half a decade after the murders, the case suddenly sparked fresh media attention and new hope for those closest to Libby and Abby. Kline was facing charges unrelated to the Delphi case at the time, and although he vehemently denied involvement, he seemed to match the depraved profile of someone who might do this. Even more shocking, he admitted to speaking with Libby. It was revealed that Kline had been interviewed less than 2 weeks after the killings and other developments were afoot. Popular podcast The Murder Sheet documented the Indiana State Police combing the rivers around Peru, Indiana. Kline has since been charged, but on separate charges. While the intricacies still elude us, thanks to that expected tight-lipped approach from authorities, we do now know that Kline might have been part of the reason they finally named a suspect, likely through some kind of collaboration between the two men, and it seemed police were confident enough with what they had to take him to trial. The wheels of justice suddenly started turning in overdrive. It was reported on October 28, 2022, that a man named Richard Allen was taken into custody for the murders. Why now? And why him? An affidavit released the following month, not redacted as per usual in this case, revealed that a bullet shell was found at the scene of the crime, tied to a fire weapon in his home. This was massive. For a long time, the public had only hushed whispers of even how the girls were murdered. Now, all of a sudden, there was a named suspect and a reason for the story to break in full. But as per usual in this case, things would be rocky. First started the court-mandated order that stopped any of the families from speaking to the public about the case. Media organizations challenged said order, leading to some 120 documents eventually being released. This came not long before Allen's attorneys would lay the groundwork for probably the most far-out defense anyone could have expected, that a group of Odinist cult members operating in the area were behind the murders. Then came the confessions, ones that Richard Allen had reportedly made while in custody on other charges over the phone with his wife, as well as to other inmates and guards. Some were skeptic that the state could get a conviction on the bullet shell alone, regardless of Allen's guilt. These confessions could potentially have mounted to something more, but Allen's legal counsel was quick to pivot it into a story of a man suffering from psychological distress and coercion in poor prison conditions. More chaos would unfold as Allen pivoted between legal teams, all working to spin the strange defense into something tangible. It seems at the moment that this will be the major play for Allen's counsel, to try and convince a jury that the girls had been murdered in a ritual sacrifice by a cult operating in a sleepy Midwestern town. Make of that what you will. Of course, not all the insanity has been on the defense side. Last year, a variety of sensitive images of the crime scene had been leaked to the public, with one suspect taking his own life. This has spilled into a separate trial of one Mitchell Thomas Westerman, who has associations with Allen's original defense team. Where does all this leave us? Most importantly, above all this confusion, with a name and a date. At the time of this video's recording, Richard Allen's legal proceedings remain chaotic, but the trial has been set to October 2024. Considering the road thus far, it is unlikely that nothing else will emerge between now and then. Plenty of people hope that the trial will be swift, with no delays. Skeptics are worried, however. The police have kept up a distant and confident approach to public relations, and after everything, this trial will be as much scrutinized their role as it will Richard Allen's. And at the heart of all this, two families still waiting for justice. At the time of this video's publication, Abby and Libby would both be 21.